This program deals with themes of an adult nature and is intended for a mature audience.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
We must guard against the military-industrial complex.
Exopolitics, paranormal phenomena, and deep analysis of current world events. From somewhere in the desert, between Area 51 and Roswell, blasting across the planet, the Manticore Network proudly presents Fairy Tales, because the truth will set you free.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
I'm as bad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
The power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty!
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Sooner or later, though, you always have to wake up.
Be skeptical, but don't close your mind.
Greetings to everyone around the world, and a warm welcome to another edition of Veritas, alternative media for discerning minds. I'm your host, Mel Fabregas, and I sincerely thank you for joining me once again. And if this is your first time, make yourself at home. I want to thank all our members for your loyalty and support. Tonight's special guest is already a veteran of the Veritas show, and we continue what we started back in December. John Lash is back with us, directly from Spain. We'll continue discussing Gnosticism and the history and alternatives that have been purposely suppressed, and it takes someone like John Lash to help find and make sense of it. As John Lash says, my enlightenment is yours, and I'm proud to have him back. I must alert you, however, we almost had to postpone this interview, as John lives in the Spanish countryside. An internet connection is sometimes very unreliable. We were disconnected on several locations, and I've done my best to make the flow of information seamless. Nonetheless, this is another mind-bending interview. John Lash will be with us shortly. To listen to tonight's full show, become a member. You'll receive instant access to all our material. And remember, Veritas survives under voluntary subscriptions only. No sponsorship equals no censorship. Think about the next time you spend $7.95. Do you really receive any value? That is what you pay per month as a Veritas member, and you'll receive over 100 shows, all in CD audio quality. Veritas TV, our very unique Manticore forum, where you can interact with enlightened people around the world to discuss everything that matters. Just go to the subscribe link of our website, veritasshow.com, and take Veritas with you. You can also download our latest show via iTunes. During these times of uncertainty, the uncensored truth is priceless. Don't wait any longer. Subscribe today. You can also purchase our futuristic 8GB metal case USB drive with Seasons 1 or 2 in case you're missing hard drive space or your internet connection is too slow. It includes bonus material, so go to the Veritas store for more information. And don't forget, get your MMS right from us. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Listen to Jim Humble's interview. Go to the past shows of our website for more information. And if you need to get in touch with me, click on the contact button of our website and join me on Facebook. And now, get ready for another chapter of a fascinating view of meanings in a sacred history long and wrongly suppressed. For more of this breathtaking historical and anthropological erudition, John Lash is coming up next. If you want to believe, stop this audio now. If you want to know what has been suppressed for thousands of years, don't go anywhere. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to Veritas.
This is George Cavassalis, and you are listening to The Veritas Show.
John Lash has been called the true successor of Mircea Eliade and the rightful heir of Joseph Campbell. Unlike those two world-class academics, John is a self-educated freelance scholar who combines studies and experimental mysticism to teach directive mythology, that is, the application of myth to life, rather than its mere interpretation. He is a leading exponent of the power of myth to direct individual experience and drive historical events over the long term. An expert on sidereal mythology, naked-eyed astronomy, precession, and the world ages, he also teaches the critique of belief systems. On metahistory.org, he presents a radical revision of Gnosticism with original commentaries on the Nag Hammadi codices. He also presents the only complete restoration by any scholar of the Sophianic myth of the pagan mysteries, the sacred story of Gaia Sophia, recounting the origin of the Earth and the human species from the galactic core. John Lash is the only scholar of comparative mythology so far known to have rewritten a classical myth, giving it a different outcome, Orpheus and Eurydice. His published works are The Seeker's Handbook, Twins and the Double, The Hero, Manhood and Power, Quest for the Zodiac, and Not in His Image. In John Lash's own words, he says, "I have only this to tell you about my enlightenment. It's yours." And directly from the southernmost point of continental Europe, Punta de Tarifa, Andalusia, southern Spain, I'm proud to introduce for the second time on Veritas, John Lash. Hello, John, and welcome back. How are you?
I'm fine, Mel. How are you?
I am fine, and I'm honored to have you back I don't think I have to tell you that I've been flooded with positive messages about the show we did back in December. And most recently, the question was, when are you going to have John Lash back? Well, here you are granting their wish. And as I said last time, and I really mean this, I consider your book a masterpiece for the truth seeker. And instead of compressing a program, I have decided to move in parts so we can discuss all of this in phases. And you've been gracious to accept future invitations. So today, we take up where we left off. But John, before we start, I just want to say that I received a message from one of our listeners, including a video that shows Christians in the war-torn African country of Ivory Coast, which has a Muslim north and a Christian south. In doing this, I have to be exposed to news, no matter how dire they are. After watching that video, in which men and women are burned alive in the name of religion, it's hard for me to accept that in the 21st century, this type of extremism still exists. What is it going to take to stop this violence based on ignorance, John?
Well, we're starting off with a bit of a bang here, Mel. But why not? It's in our face. You have to say that. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be back again. And sure, I'll tackle this question right off. If I were asked to summarize the plight of the human species at this critical turning point, I would put it in this way. We are facing many, many things. A lot of confusion, a lot of deceit, a lot of terrorism, genuine and faked, a lot of attacks on our species from one place or another. But basically, it all boils down to a test of sanity. You know, it's a test of sanity. And we cannot proceed as a species unless we claim our own sanity. So how do we define what's sane and what's not? Well, by these very phenomena and events of which you speak, we are able to detect, we're able to observe clearly that this is insane behavior. And it has been going on for many centuries. I trace in my book, Not in His Image, the long progression of the insanity that is perpetrated in the cause of religion. And that is one of the first forms of insanity that we need to recognize in order to find our true sanity and have some true future for this species on this planet.
And I just could not believe what I saw. I was thinking, we are not in the dark ages. We're not 1,000 years ago. This is the 21st century, where you would think that people would evolve to the point of realizing that this nonsense and ignorance should not be tolerated. But it seems, and this takes me to the topic at hand, John. You mentioned the phrase in your book, political figure shrouded in a mystical aura. Isn't this a strategy used by most governments of the world right now?
Certainly, certainly. You see, what religion really is, if it's not a religion of the goddess, if it's not a religion that recognizes the divinity of the planet, the divine experiment of the goddess, Gaia, and our part in it, if it's a male god off-planet religion, it's really not a religion at all. It's really a political program dressed up as a religion. And it has been used that way for countless centuries. So what has to change is this behavior that is driven by this religious ideology that I expose in my book, the ideology of the Abrahamic religions, the Messiah, the judgment of God, and that sort of thing, the divine plan. And it's the behavior that has to change. But the thing that each one of us needs to realize is that beliefs drive that behavior. Beliefs drive behavior. This is one of the primary teachings of my site, midhistory.org. And so if you're going to ask ourselves, how can we change the behavior of people who are still, to this day, torturing and burning other people in the name of God? Well, we have to look at the beliefs that drive that behavior. And this is the test. This is the test, the big test that we're facing right now. And I think we're in the final phase of that test. Either we pass or we fail.
And by the way, we're folks who are thousands of miles away. John is in Spain. I'm in the desert of the United States, and the connection may not be 100% where it should be, but we're crossing our fingers to make sure that we're not disconnected. You can hear me okay on your side.
Good.
I guess whoever wanted to tamper with our conversation realized what I was saying and help us a little bit. But anyway.
Got the hell out of here. Right.
Yes.
Okay, great.
In reading your book, Not in His Image, there is so much history that is purposely omitted from most history books. You say, quote, the Jews introduced crucifixion only to find it adopted by the Romans and used against them. Don't we see this today being used, the hijacking of religion by governments in order to keep a tighter grip? And it doesn't have to be theocracies, even democracies too.
Sure. Religion in the form of these three Abrahamic religions is nothing but, this is the bitter pill that I may propose that people swallow when they read my book. I'm sorry. Mel, I call it the history's hardest lesson.
Yes.
This is history's hardest lesson. That what we've come to call religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and where many people have enshrined their sacred values and their sense of human dignity, is actually not religion at all in the true sense of the word. It is a political system of social control, brainwashing, and tyranny. And it is fundamentally theocratic at basis, even if the theocratic aspects are sometimes played down because they don't play so well in a secular modern world. But when you really cut to the core, you'll find that the pathology at the basis of this. Yeah, well, religion is, you can say that there is a true spiritual message in religion. For instance, in Christianity, you can claim that Jesus had an original teaching of love or something important to say to us, and that it was somehow perverted and hijacked. You've probably heard that argument.
Sure.
People often make that argument. But if you read my book closely, you'll find out that I don't make that argument. I claim that the ideology and even the ethics of Christianity and Judaism from the get-go were corrupt and were nothing but tools for tyranny and for political aims. That's a very harsh judgment, and it's a very hard pill to swallow. But look at what's happening today. It's no different today when you see how religion is used so flagrantly today to obviously commit atrocities of all manners. Then you have to take a few steps back and say, well, maybe it always was that way. And my contention is that it always was. And this is where we have to break the spell of evil. At its core, we have to defy and cast aside those religious belief systems which are being used to decimate the world and to desecrate the earth.
And one thought from the section of your book called Converting the Barbarians. The more the natives resisted, the more intense the enforcement, unquote. Why is it that Christianity professes to be a religion, and even the other ones, of peace, but when it comes to indoctrination, hundreds of years ago, violent coercion would be used, and today we see it more as social shunning? How has the indoctrination or conversion process changed from then to now?
Well, basically, it hasn't changed now. If you look at the facts of it, you know that the large area subject to evangelization by Christianity today is Africa. And if you go and look at the facts of how this is done, you will see that African tribes are intimidated by threats of damnation. They are tortured. They are pressured by all kinds of means to adopt Christianity. Christianity has never been a religion that was adopted voluntarily by people. It has always had to be forced on people. That has not changed. And to understand that again, go back to the fundamental point I mentioned earlier. Belief drives behavior. So if you want to ask yourself this question, well, how can Christians behave in this way toward other people? How can they torture people? How can they impose their belief system rather than invite people into it and and accept coexistence. Christianity has never accepted coexistence. How can this be? Well, the answer is, look at the beliefs they hold. The beliefs drive that kind of behavior. The beliefs are insane. The fundamental beliefs of Christian ideology of salvation, which is derived from Judaism, are insane. This is what I argue in my book, as you know.
Of course, and it seems that they want to keep the monopoly and eradicate any competition. And of course, Gnosticism, being an alternative to religion, is frowned upon by anybody who mentions it to anybody who's, in my case, as a Catholic. And this is not an attack. I'm just telling you what I went through throughout life, school, 10 years as an altar boy. Whenever I used the word pagan, I was being looked upon as heresy. But John, since you have studied the Middle East, the so-called cradle of civilization, and we're going to be mixing some of current world events with all the interview. Can you share with us your opinion of what's transpiring there right now? Is the transition part of the controller's script, or is the transformation real?
Well, it's very hard to call that one, Mel. I think I'm me along with a lot of other people, many of whom are much better informed on politics and local issues in the Middle East, are scratching their heads about it. My best guess would be that those so-called revolutions in Libya, Egypt, and so forth have a real component in them. There is something real and genuine in them. Why? To the extent that, very simply, that all human beings want to be free. We just want to be free to coexist with each other and get along with our lives and live and prosper together. We can prosper together. We can't prosper as a society or a species if we're divided and fighting each other all the time, which is, as you know, a tactic of control by the New World Order people. So to the extent that it's a natural desire of the human heart to want to coexist with other people and get along and thrive with a certain healthy sense of competition, perhaps, but not a murderous type of competition, then they're genuine. But in the large picture, I'm sorry to say that it looks to me like they are manipulations, they are orchestrations. We see the usual agent provocateur. They're part of a big chess game being played by the military and political psychopaths who think that they're going to take control of this planet. So unfortunately, I have to say that I'm not terribly inspired by the idealistic view of these events.
You see, we're somewhat jaded. I am too, because I think perhaps they're removing one dictator with a younger one that could be subverted even faster. All these people may have had in the time that they've been in power. Hosni Mubarak as an example. He started getting a little bit recalcitrant and not bowing to the powers that be, if you will, and it was time for them to go. I mean, look at the ages. And then we have Assad in Syria, and we're saying here in the West that no, we should keep him there because he's a reformer. A reformer?
Right.
Give me a break.
Sure.
I mean, what's the difference between him and a king? Right?
That's right. That's right. Well, you can say it's jaded, and in a way, perhaps it is. But I think in a more positive sense, it might be that our eyes are opening, and the deceit, we're seeing through the deceit, and we're seeing the pattern of deceit. And the pattern of deceit is fairly obvious. The shadow government, the military corporate controllers, who are nothing but a mafia of criminals and murderers in positions of power, set up these dictators and use them until they have no use for them anymore, and then they bring them down and set up another one.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to be a genius to see these patterns. Now, you can call me jaded, but on the other hand, maybe I deserve that term and you deserve that term. We would really be jaded if we totally lost and abandoned our faith in humanity. That we're not going to do. But let's not be naive. When the events of the world stage are being maliciously orchestrated in front of us, we have to stand up and call it for what it is.
Absolutely. And there's a term you use in the book. Do you pronounce it Zadokite?
Zadokite.
Zadokite, okay. In the section of your book called Double Agent, you mentioned some information that originates from the Dead Sea Scrolls regarding how a new religion was hijacked, Christianity.
Right.
Can you elaborate on this?
Sure. The word Zadokite is an extremely important word for understanding the history of the Earth and the great turnabout that happened around 2,000 years ago that brought us to this dangerous situation of annihilation that we're now facing. If you understand the word Zadokite, you understand the key to the religious ideology of the psychopaths and the controllers. You understand their ultimate trick. It's the ace up their sleeve. Zadokite is a term that's not of my invention. You'll find it in the work of Robert Eisenman, who was one of the great rebels of the Dead Sea Scholar movement. He wrote James, the Brother of Jesus, and other books. And it refers to a splinter sect of ultra-radical Jews. It doesn't refer to the Jewish population of the ancient world as a whole. It doesn't refer to mainstream Judaism, but rather to a sect, more that might be compared, for instance, to the Branch Dravidian sect of David Koresh.
You just read my mind. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you say sect.
It's a very close parallel. The Branch Dravidian sect of David Koresh was a Christian sect that got wiped out by the American government in a horrifying way. Mm-hmm. And it was Christian and fundamentalist. In some ways, it was even Judaic. But certainly it did not represent mainstream Christianity, nor did the ideology and beliefs of Koresh and his cult represent what most Christians believe. Well, likewise, in the ancient Middle East, about between 2000 and 2,600 years ago, this splinter sect of the Zadokim, which means the perfected or righteous ones, appeared in the Jewish community of that time. And it was a very tiny splinter group, but it was ultra-genocidal and ecocidal. It was really a cult of murderous and dangerous psychopathic people who actually frightened the rest of the Jewish community as well. Jewish people as a whole in the time of the Roman Empire, the time of so-called Jesus Christ, were terrified by this ultra-radical sect of the Zadokim, or Zadokites, who are also called the Zealots. That would probably be the name that most people would recognize them by. And you even find the term in the Bible, in the New Testament. For instance, Simon Zelotes, who was one of the followers of Jesus, according to the New Testament fable, would have been Simon the Zealot, meaning that he was a member of this Zadokite cult. And the fundamental belief of the Zadokite cult, which is also, I would point out, please note, the germ of Zionist ideology today, the germ of it, is that there is a race of people chosen by God who are more perfect and deserving than anyone else. And in the end of time, the world will be theirs, and all of those who do not live up to the standards of perfection, Zadik means perfection or righteousness, will be damned and condemned by God and his Messiah. This is the core of the insane pathology of Judeo-Christian religion. And what happened was that in the centuries leading up to the time of St. Paul, the Roman Empire occupied the Middle East and they occupied Palestine. And the stability of the Roman Empire in that area was threatened by this group of radicals who could not have been more than 4,000 to 6,000 people. Some of them lived in the outpost in the Dead Sea. Others lived in various cells in Damascus and other places in Syria. And the Roman Empire, the stability of the empire in the Middle East was so threatened by this group of radicals that it was a grave concern to the Roman authorities. Another historical parallel that we cannot afford to overlook. Today, what do we see in this very same area of the world? We see the Palestinian Intifada, that is, the rising up of the Palestinian people against the occupation by Israel. And this is nothing but a twisted replay of the rising up of the Zadokite cult against the Roman occupation. It's the same script, only played another way around, you know? And so the madness persists today. And this sect was so dangerous, not only to the Romans, but also to the Jewish, the peace and coexistence of the Jewish community, that the Roman authorities eventually had to expel all Jews from the Holy Land. This is the reason, very few people know this, this is the actual historical reason for the exile of the Jews from Jerusalem in 70 AD by Titus. He threw out all the Jews because he couldn't figure out who the Zadokite were, because they were hiding and hid themselves among the ordinary people. And they were such a threat that they threw them all out. And needless to say, the world has not recovered from that event to this day. The thing about St. Paul, and you really need to read the chapters 4, 5, and 6 of my book to get this astounding story, is that St. Paul was actually Saul, and he was a mercenary in the service of the Romans. In fact, he was highly protected by the Romans. They sent troops to protect him. You can read this in the New Testament. And he was a mercenary that the Romans sent out to find these radical Zadokites and to find their cells, to dig them out and bring them back to the authorities so they could be executed. This is what his mission actually was when he went to Damascus. But a very odd thing happened, which was that Saul was abducted into the Zadokite cult, and he actually became a member of the radical cult that he was sent to destroy. This is an amazing story, and it's not just my invention, by the way, strongly supported by the work of Robert Eisenberg, who was a tremendous Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, and also John Allegro. So, to make a long story short, Paul did something absolutely horrific. He was inducted into the cult that he was sent to break. Can you understand that? Can you imagine, like a detective today, an undercover detective, was sent into some cult in California, some weird, millennial cult of people who think the world is going to come to an end. And instead of breaking open that cult and exposing them, he himself becomes the most passionate member of the cult.
And you see that. You see that all the time. You see that with cops who infiltrate drug rings. Yes.
That's absolutely true. It's a very common psychological phenomenon, not so hard for us to believe with the privileged perspective we have today to understand these things. And then what happened was even more outrageous. I show that he learned the deepest secrets of this Zadokite cult, especially he learned about Melchizedek, who was the central figure, the spiritual leader of the cult, as it were, kind of a very creepy, clone-like, non-human, superhuman entity, Melchizedek. He was the leading figure of the Zadokite cult. Saul learned about all the secrets of the cult, including the identity of Melchizedek, and then he turned around and he defected again from the cult that he had joined. And he took their ideology and he went out and turned it into what we now call Christianity. So the germ of Christian doctrine, Christian ideology of salvation, comes not from Judaism. This is a mistake. It doesn't come from mainstream Judaism at all. Mainstream Judaism retains its separate identity, even to this day. Anybody knows that, right? Orthodox Jews and devout Jews have their own identity and ideology. They don't consider themselves to be the founders of Christianity, do they?
Right.
They weren't. Saul produced Christianity out of the genocidal and apocalyptic belief system of this Zadokite cult. And that's what I call the transference. Until the time of Saul, the Zadokite cult was a splinter group. It was very, very dangerous and volatile, and they were very violent. They murdered other Jews. They knifed them. They cut their throats. They crucified other Jews who they considered to be collaborating with the Romans. But they were not a pandemic religious movement. They were a very isolated, small sect within mainstream Judaism. But through Saul, who became Paul, that virus exploded. It's like a vector. It's what they call, in terms of viral or epidemiology, they call it a vector. In order to get a virus like the swine flu or AIDS into a population group, you need a vector. Understand that term. And the vector is the infected person who takes it into the larger group. So Paul was the infected person who carried this Zadokite ideology into the world at large, and we today are still living out the ramifications of that horrific expansion, that pandemic virus.
So when we say religious zealot, it's almost saying religious Zadokite. Is that a good synonym?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. You know, I grew up in a small town in Maine, Friendship, Maine, that was dominated by a fundamentalist Christian cult. And almost everyone in the town belonged to the local church. And I remember very clearly the fiery sermons of the men of that town, talking about zeal and the zeal of St. Paul. Zeal, by which they meant that Paul was inspired and infilled by the love of Jesus and by the belief, his belief in the truth of the Redeemer and all this. And that was his zeal. They didn't have no idea what they were talking about, that they were talking about a toxic poison. That zeal and zealot come from this Zadokite origin. Absolutely, that is the origin of those terms.
So can we say, for example, we use the word Zionist, right? And some people say, "Oh, you're being anti-Semite." That's absolutely not true. There are Christian Zionists, there are Muslim Zionists, and right now, can we say that the term Zadokite has turned into Zionism? And then we looked at all the Jews, and we cannot put them all together because not all of them are Zionists. And folks, I don't have to name names. You get the idea. You know, we hear of 9/11. You hear the preparations for war. You know the usual suspects. Those are the Zionists or the Zadokites of today, aren't they?
True. And this is such an important thing to realize, because if we cannot identify the virus and disidentify those people who are not accessory to this virus, we don't have a chance in hell of sorting this situation out. You know, the same applies today, even more than it applied 2,000 years ago. The mainstream Jews, the people of the Hebrew extraction, Semites, if you want to call them,
right,
but there were other Semites beside Hebrews. I mean, come on, let's get real here.
Some Arabs are Semites. Some Arabs are Semites too.
Totally. You know, Semite doesn't just mean Jewish. It's a very much broader sense. But the ancient Hebrews were not to blame for this Zadokite ideology. In fact, they hated it themselves, and they were the victims of it as much as anyone else. Just as today, many decent and moral, compassionate, intelligent Jewish people who just want to go along with their own faith and coexist with others and not evangelize,
right,
you know, are stigmatized and made accessories to this Zionist program, which is extremely evil. This Zionist program is evil. There's nothing in it that is not evil. It is conceived as a deceit against humanity. And the basis of that deceit, if you want to understand the basis of it and how we got into this mess, read the first 6 chapters of my book where I lay that out.
You know, there's my parents left Spain to Cuba, and I visited a few years ago, and I saw a community of 120, back then in 95, of Jews. And they were asked, you know, why haven't you left? And they said, we're very happy here. We're very happy the way we are. We don't need any Zionists to take us and represent us. We're very happy with who we are. And I bet you if you ask most Jewish people around the world, they'll tell you the same thing.
Yes, they will. You know, it's a terrible thing, a terrible event, not just for the ancient Jews, but for the whole human species, that those people were driven out of Palestine under these draconian measures taken by the Roman emperors. As I said, the Roman emperors could not sort out who were the Zadokites and who weren't. because they were an extremely secretive group. And so in order to eliminate the Zadokites, they had to throw all the Jews out. They had to, in effect, exile all the Jews. It's a terrible suffering for the Jewish people. But given that that is the case, it must also be said that, to their great merit and to their praise, Jewish people have, circulated around the world. And they've contributed beautifully and wonderfully to human society wherever they've gone, while at the same time retaining their identity and coexisting. Zadokites could never do that. Zadokites and Zionists could never do that. So we really need to sort out the Zadokite Zionist problem and see not only the origin of it, but see how it's used today as the most sinister tool for deceit and destruction on our planet. This ideology is very, very sinister. And the people who are using it know exactly what they're doing. They're not naive. Some of them may believe in it. I don't think that most of them do. I think that they use it in an extremely disingenuous way because it is so divisive and it works so well as a tool of deceit and division and domination. We've really got to face this. This is the monster in our midst. This is the source of the human nightmare.
And during our last show, I mentioned to you how when the Moors took over Spain, I visited southern Spain, and I was very impressed by seeing churches, synagogues, and mosques right next to each other, and where people coexisted peacefully back then when the Moors were around. And then when the kingdom of Spain took over, then they started changing things, and it became apparent that they wanted Christianity to be the leading religion in the area. What's your take on that? I mean, back then it seems that peace was around, and then all of a sudden it changed again.
Well, Mel, I'll give you my take on that, and I have to warn you that this is coming from an extremely ruthless viewpoint, because I am a reborn Gnostic, and I know what happened to the precious, precious birthright of our species that was preserved in Gnosticism and in the mystery schools. And I make no compromises in my view on this matter. It's all fine and wonderful to have this interfaith concept and to think of everybody in these religions coexisting together, the Jewish synagogues and the Moorish places of worship and the Christian churches and so forth. And fine, there may well have been some places in the world, such as here in Spain, in Granada,
right,
or some moments in history when that interfaith kind of coexistence and tolerance existed. But I would like to point out something to you, that even in the best interfaith scenario that you can imagine, if you go today, look on the internet at all the interfaith organizations and go to their meetings and talk to their leaders, you will not find Gnosticism included in the interfaith movements.
Right.
So I ask you to reflect on that, my friends. Because as far as I know, Gnosticism, which is the spiritual and ethical and visionary teaching of the mystery schools, contains the most complete story of our species. It contains the most complete explanation of who we are, where the human species really originated, who is the goddess Gaia, or they called Sophia, how the earth came into being, why we went insane, what are the forces that threaten human sanity, what threatens the divine experiment, and I could go on for days. That was the teaching that the Gnostics had, and if you're not going to include that teaching in the interfaith system, the umbrella, if you're going to put them under the umbrella of the interface, well, I'm sorry. I'm not too impressed by this interfaith concept. And finally, I would add, too, that, we can't have, this is my conclusion, which I put at the end of my book, we cannot have a paternal religion of divine paternalism on the same planet as a religion of the goddess. Cannot have them on the same planet. It's a war. It's not a war I chose, but it's a war that I stand in. And I stand on the front line. And I can tell you if the human species is going to survive in harmony with nature and each other, they will do it through the return to the goddess Sophia, or not at all. And we cannot survive in these belief systems of divine paternalism, of the off-planet Father God, the Messiah, the judgment of the world, the divine plan, the chosen people. We cannot survive with this ideology. Look at the record of history.
Well, you see, many people who are listening to us now are new to Gnosticism. I was new until I was referred to your work by my friend Jim Nichols. Growing up as a Catholic, who, by the way, I'm no longer religious, but growing up, there was not the alternative to religion, which is Gnosticism. And even if I wanted to switch religions, the alternative was never there for me to be exposed to. I had to go out there and find the truth myself to bump into John Lash and do this and be awakened to this reality that was not around for me to absorb. Does that make sense?
It does indeed. It does indeed. And thank you so much for touching on a real key point of my book, a key point in the message of my book. And this is a real deal breaker. And as you know, there's some deal breakers in my book.
Many.
There's some really big deal breakers. Yeah, there are. And this is a deal breaker. So to those of you out there, the first time you're perhaps hearing me or you're familiar with this term Gnosticism, in my sense of the word, I want to tell you, as Mel just suggested, that Gnosticism is not an alternative religion. It's an alternative to religion. That's what it is.
Exactly.
Gnosticism is based on the central figure of Sophia, which means wisdom. Sophia is the root of the word philosophia, philosophy, which means the love of wisdom. So Gnosticism is a path of philosophy, of the love of wisdom. And the gnosis, or the knowing of those ancient seers of the mysteries, was not just another belief system that you can stack it along Judaism and the Talmud, or stack it alongside the New Testament, or stack it alongside Islam, or even stack it alongside the Bhagavad Gita and Buddhism and Hinduism and Buddhism. You can't stack it alongside any of those things, because it stands as a unique path and practice of direct access to the knowledge of our divinity, of the divinity of our species and the divinity of the earth. And that is what I mean by goddess religion, the Sophianic vision. I'm a little reluctant even to call it goddess religion, because I don't want to suggest a false, comparison. This is a very unique way that I have recovered through the study of the Gnostic materials. No other Gnostic scholar has been able to recover their genuine pagan and pre-Christian message. I've done this. And this is a unique way for humanity to find itself, to know itself, and to know why we are really here, and what is this experiment that we are involved in. Who originated this experiment, and why on earth it is going so badly wrong.
By the way, this is not in your book, but you mentioned a very controversial event in the history of the United States, the massacre at the Branch Davidian compound, and its leader, David Koresh. It's one of those things that I can still not understand. Why so much brutal force and weapons of mass destruction, gas? What's your reaction to what happened there, by the way?
Well, it's, again, these things are very complex, Mel, and difficult to understand, and we can get lost and confused in trying to sort them out. One thing that I find extremely helpful is the concept of coexistence. This is a concept that has helped me understand and sort out, first of all, the whole history of Christianity and its relation to Gnosticism and the mysteries. Because one of the first things that you see when you go back and look at the rise of Christianity is you see that it began to be defined ideologically first by St. Paul, Saul, around 80 AD. And then it took a couple of hundred years before the ideological structure and the political ramifications were developed. But as soon as it had a profile, and a program, It refused to coexist with anything else. Refused. Well, that itself is in basic contradiction to its message. If Christianity is a message of love, then why didn't it coexist with everything else that already was there, namely paganism and Gnosticism, which had been there for thousands of years already? When the settlers came from Europe, and the colonialists came to the United States, they were Christians. The conquistadores of Spain were Christians, whether believe it or not. They acted like they were. And why didn't they coexist peacefully with the Native Americans and the Aztecs and the Maya? So what we come down to by asking that kind of question is a fundamental insight. And again, this is a very hard insight to accept. Now, you can tell if you are dealing with a malicious and destructive political ideology. You can tell if you're dealing with a fascist ideology disguised as religion, if it accepts no coexistence.
Competition.
No competition, no coexistence. This certainly applies to Islam, which is the worst form of this virus. I mean, Islam is the form of the virus that kills the host. Islam is really evil, and Islam, by definition, allows no coexistence. What does Islam mean? Submission. It means that everybody submits to that ideology. There is no coexistence. So to get back to the David Koresh thing, complicated situation. There are all kinds of agendas going on. But, fundamentally, the powers that be who are using the theocratic Zadokite ideology will not allow anything that resembles it to coexist with them. Not even anything that resembles it. And the terrifying thing about the David Koresh cult was that, in a sense, it was like exposing the raw nerve. It was exposing what the real fanatical, xenophobic nature of Christianity actually is. And they couldn't allow that to be exposed, you see. That's my hit. Maybe it sounds like a weird angle, but that's my hit.
But you see, in a country that you have constitutional rights that give you the freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, why was such brute force used against men, women, and even children? That is one part that I could never understand. I mean, we talk about diplomacy. We talk about not invading Libya because we need to use diplomacy. What happened that day? You know what I mean? Anyway, we can be talking about this subject forever.
Yeah.
Yes, it was horrific. But since you mentioned the Native American, let's talk about the sin doctrine, as you call it. In this case, Christians are sinners from the moment that they are born. I was born allegedly with the original sin. You say the moral resilience of the native people in Europe and America could have resisted the sin doctrine. What happened then? Gunpowder and swords were more powerful?
They could have resisted the sin doctrine, and they did resist it by their own innate morality, by the morality of their way of life. The word pagan, which is terribly slandered today, and don't believe any fundamentalist Christian who uses the word pagan, because they're ignorant, totally ignorant, and they have no idea what the word pagan means. The word pagan is just the European equivalent of the word indigenous people.
Right.
Or Native Americans. So everyone knows what the Native Americans were. Well, the pagans of Europe were the Native Americans of Europe. Just like the Native Americans of our continent are the pagans. They were pagans. That means they were country dwellers, people who were bonded to the earth, and not just in a superficial sense of being tree huggers who grew their own vegetables or hunter-gatherers, in a much deeper sense, bonded to the divinity of the earth, and they respected and revered the life of the earth and found their frame of life within the greater frame of Wakantanka and the many beautiful names that they called the great spirit of the earth. And these people had a morality. This is another thing. You hear the word paganism and suddenly it means, immorality, sacrificing children, sexual orgies. A pagan is someone who would mistreat other people, who has no conscience. These are the stupid implications that people bring to this term. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I can tell you that is completely wrong.
And I remember a few years ago, I used to visit Indian reservations for a business I used to own a few years ago. And it was interesting to see Christianity all over the reservation. For the Christians who may be listening, they may say, so what? But knowing how the indigenous people had their own sets of beliefs sequestered, it was a little bit shocking. And even I'm from the Caribbean. And I remember traveling throughout the islands and seeing the voodoo ladies with the saints and all the same idols, if you will, but they had changed their names because back then they couldn't practice unless they had the same idols, otherwise they would be persecuted. What's your take on all of this?
Well, that's one way that the pagan people attempted to preserve their pre-Christian ways of life and disguise them as they were. Voodoo is a perfect example.
Right.
Voodoo, by the way, is a tremendously important subject on this planet. And I recommend to everyone to read The Serpent and the Rainbow by Wade Davis.
Oh, I saw the movie.
Yeah. Did you really?
The movie The Serpent and the Rainbow. Oh, my God, yes.
Yeah. If you want to have an eye-opening experience and know what voodoo really was and get away from this Hollywood B-movie idea of what voodoo is, read this book, because it's really an eye-opener. But voodoo and religion of Africa, pagan religions of Europe, and the Native American religions all have a profound morality. It's all well and good that Christians can smugly sit back and say, oh, well, look, they adopted Christianity on the reservations, and isn't that great?
Yeah.
Well, it may or may not be, my friends, but what did they have before they adopted that?
Right.
What do you know about that? What do you know about what they had to have ripped out of their souls before they adopted this Christian ideology? And if you go back to that, you will find two things. The mainstay of pagan or indigenous morality consists of two things. One, a confidence in the essential goodness of human beings, that we are here to mutually aid each other. Doesn't mean that we can't have differences, doesn't mean that we can't have fights. But the bottom line is that we are basically here to live peacefully together. That is our nature. That is part of our divine birthright. And the second thing you find endemic to these pagan indigenous cultures is honor. You see, honor is the pagan attribute. Honor is the great, great attribute of paganism. Paganism is an honor system. If you're born a pagan, you do not hurt other people because it is against your honor to do so. It's dishonorable. You don't not hurt other people because you're going to be punished for doing so, or because there is some set of laws written on stone by the fiery finger of an off-planet father god, and that you're under threat if you violate his set of rules. No, that's not why you behave well. You behave well because you do it on your honor, and honor makes a human being. A human being who does not preserve his or her own honor becomes less than a human being. And so the honor system is the basis of pagan morality, and that's what was taken away from the American Indians. The stories are heartbreaking, Mel. I'm sure you know them. Read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Read about white man speak with forked tongue. You know that line,
Yes. Yes.
How many times did these colonialists, these military men who were devout Christians, or pretended to be, which is almost the same thing, who came in and lied and made treaties with these Indians and betrayed the treaties? And why did the Indians give in? And why did the pagans cave in? Because when you are an honorable person, it's very hard to deal with somebody who is totally deceitful and dishonorable.
Right. You call it counter-mimicry?
Counter-mimicry, right. That's right. Yeah.
And we all know the phrase divide and conquer. But during the submission and subversion of the native peoples, you say that what really happened was divide and convert. But isn't conquer and convert in this case exactly the same?
Mel, I'm of the opinion, after writing that book, and that came out in November 2006, and even in these 5 years of retrospect, conquest and conversion are almost identical terms.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Why on earth are Christian missionaries going into Africa and South America and converting these people in the most hideous manner possible, under threat of death? I mean, they come in with a text that they read in Latin, before a tribe of Africans, a tribe of a village of 200 or 300 Africans with soldiers standing there with Uzis and their fingers on the triggers. This is conversion. What is it? It's nothing but conquest. And behind those people, there are governmental, military, and political interests. And that's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. We have to realize, and it's very hard. I tell you, I know my book is a huge challenge to many people, but it's very hard to realize how absolutely corrupt this Judeo-Christian morality is, and what a tool of evil it has become, or was from the beginning, actually.
And it seems that Africa, it seems to be the most fertile ground right now. I have a friend, Mauricio Bayata, a researcher, who told me that he was traveling throughout Africa, and he's from Rome. So, of course, talk about having a TV there all day long with the Pope talking about all the subjects that are relevant to the Vatican. But in Africa, every couple of miles, he would see a church with a huge parabolic antenna. And all they did 24/7 was just disseminate information to convert the locals and the people.
That's right.
There. But
that's right.
Do you think the discovery of and just moving forward a little bit, do you think the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was a positive event for Christianity or not? Did it bring information to light that they would prefer not to be public?
Totally, my friend. Totally. It's a huge subject, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I too cover it. And I'm very proud of the way I was able to cover it in my book, because I was able to do it, I believe, succinctly and cogently without, going into 500 or 600 pages. Right. But one thing that I point out is that when these Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, written on sheepskins and other parchments in Aramaic and ancient Hebrew, the Vatican scholars were right there on the ground at the discovery. And they, were, shitting in there, whatever it is they wear. They really were terrified because they saw that this was going to blow the lid right off their program. And so it's a very famous story, and anyone can read it. If you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, a book called The Dead Sea Scrolls Scandal by Michael Bagent and Michael Bagent. It tells that there was a 50-year program by the Vatican to keep the information in these Dead Sea Scrolls from being translated and brought out to the public at large, because they knew that when the Dead Sea Scrolls is the death knell to Christianity. Absolutely. Once you see the root of what Christianity is, you can no longer make excuses for it, You can no longer say, oh, but Jesus really had a good message and, it was really something good in the beginning. You can't say that because you see what the beginning of it actually was. And the beginning of it was genocide, geocide, murder in the name of the Father God. We are the select people who will rule the earth and the rest of you will die. Exactly what the Zionist New World Order program is today. And man, there was an enormous, and it blew open around 1991 after they kept a lid on it for about 50 years. It's a hell of a story.
And it makes you wonder why Bechtel owns most of the Dead Sea Scrolls. What is it that they need to protect so much to keep it sequestered?
I have to tell you, man, with that piece of information, every time I hear it, it puts a chill up my spine. It really does. And also, as I point out in my book, the CIA were there on the ground. They hit the ground running the moment these Dead Sea Scrolls, and they photographed them, and they photographed some scrolls and some fragments which have never, ever else been found. So as explosive as the Dead Sea Scrolls are, it's quite likely that there are other parchments or pages in the scrolls which are even more damaging to the Christian church. And they were eliminated, and they were repressed by the powers that be. Why? Because the powers that be, Bechtel, the military-industrial complex, the warmongers, the ones who make money on war, use this Judeo-Christian ideology as a tool of social control.
Yeah. You cannot put it more succinctly than that. And John, we have to take our one and only intermission. Before we take the break, how do we get in touch with your work, all these great books?
Well, the main thing is metahistory.org has about 24 books on it in itself, so you can go and delve into that. I suggest that you click on the site guide and just take a tour through the site to see what's in there. And then my book, latest book, Not in His Image, is really the one that contains the essence of what we're talking about this evening. And that's the place to go, the logical place to go from here.
Please don't go anywhere. We have so much more to cover. We have questions from the audience around the world and more discussions to take place here with John Lash. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to talk more with our special guest in our members section. If you're not a member, just head on over to our website, veritasshow.com, and click on the subscribe link to listen to the rest of the show. As a member, have you subscribed to the iTunes link? Let iTunes download all segments of each new show automatically. There's a link in the members section. Just click on it and let iTunes do the rest. We'll take a short intermission, listen to some music, and we'll be right back with more. Enjoy.
We're all someone's daughter. We're all someone's son. This is Jay Widener, and you're listening to Veritas. This is Jay Widener, and you're listening to Veritas.
Welcome back to Veritas. I'm here with John Lash. This is Mel Fabregas. And how about the most recent archaeological finding in Jordan? Over 70 metal Christian books found in a cave there. Have you researched this at all?
No, I haven't. But I have to tell you again that I have also a pretty ruthless and uncompromising view toward that. First of all, I would say, okay, if these are some evidence, if they, like the Nag Hammadi texts, which were found in December 1945 in Egypt, if these are some rare flakes of surviving Gnostic knowledge, well, bravo. If they have something to tell us about the divine Sophia, the divinity of the earth, the divine feminine, our birthright from the galactic center, all the fantastic things that are contained in the Gnostic teachings, well, indeed, let's dig into it. But if it's just going to be another first century blah, blah, blah about Jesus and the Messiah, I have to say I compare it to the story of the chicken in the road. You know, there's a bus, it's probably in Mexico, and it goes down the road and runs over this chicken. So we're all on the bus, right? So we climb out of the bus excitedly, and we go, and there's a dead chicken in the road, and we all pick up pieces of its meat and climb back in the bus and make a chicken salad. And then the next week, the bus is coming down the same route. It runs over, get this, not another chicken.
Same chicken.
The same chicken. It runs over the same chicken. We all climb out of the bus. We pick off the pieces of the carcass, the pieces of meat. We climb back into the bus, and we have a chicken salad again for dinner. Next week, the bus comes through again. How many times has this goddamn bus run over the carcass of the chicken, which is the historical Jesus? The historical Jesus is a chicken carcass, and there isn't any more meat left on that carcass. So let's just move on, okay?
It's the proverbial beating a dead horse again and again.
Totally. I mean, what else are we going to find out? What are we going to find out? You remember the Da Vinci Code and what a revelation that was?
Yes.
Well, the reason why that was a revelation was because finally somebody started talking about women. And finally, we could stretch our imaginations to the point where we could suppose that even the divine Messiah, if he were incarnated as a man, maybe once got laid. You know, God, wouldn't that be fantastic for the world, you know? And so the Da Vinci Code was extremely moving because it brought the figure of Mary Magdalene to the forefront. But at the end of the day, here we are, 10 years down the road? And who cares? No. Did it make any difference? Didn't make any difference. No.
Since we're talking about the Nag Hammadi for a second,
sure.
Is it almost like outtakes of early Christian literature, almost like strips of film left in the editor's room, their lost gospels? What implications does this have to the Christians and the Jewish religions, the Nag Hammadi?
Okay. The Nag Hammadi text, which consists of 52 fragmentary documents in Coptic, bound books, found in clay jars in Egypt of 1945, are practically the sole surviving original evidence we have of Gnostic teachings and mystery school teachings. They are most definitely not outtakes from the New Testament, as has been claimed by Gnostic scholars such as Elaine Pagels and Karen King, among others. They're at the top of the list. Outtakes from the Christian Gospels. What would this mean? Let me tell you what they're not. These scholars, who are themselves of a Christian background, admittedly, and who have said, Karen King, the Gnostic creation myth of the divine Sophia contains one of the most mind-boggling statements that you ever come across. It says that in the process of the structuring of our solar system, in the very, very early phases of the creation of our solar system, before the Earth was formed, a kind of accident occurred in the cosmos, in the galactic limbs. Now, some of you may know that our solar system, to which the Earth now belongs, is like a fleet of ships sailing in the third limb of the spiral arms of a vast galaxy. At the core of the galaxy is the pleroma, as the Gnostics called it. This is the center of divine plasmic illumination, which is totally alive and consciousness. It's the realm of the gods. And then we have these 4 spiral arms, and our solar system is in the third of those spiral arms. And before the Earth appeared in the solar system, a very bizarre event occurred. One of the gods from the galactic core, named Sophia, was so infatuated and passionately interested in the experiment that was unfolding, that could be unfolding out there in the galactic limbs, that she left the center. She was pulled out of the center of the galaxy, and she crashed, in a way, into the realm of the third galactic limb, where the solar system eventually arose. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing picture. If you go to metahistory.org, you'll see under Gaia Sophia my 9-episode synopsis of this myth, and you'll also find it in metahistory.org. So as a result of this unusual event, which might be considered to be like a spiking of energy from the galactic core, a spike or plume erupted and extended out into the area of the galactic limbs. Well, physics will tell you, astronomers will tell you, that the things that happen in the galactic core of our galaxy are completely different than the things that happen in the limbs. In the galactic core is pure star matter. There are no stars as such. There's just stellar plasma. There's just pure light. And there are no planets. So the planets where life can evolve arise in the limbs. And that is an area like a field of atomic and electronic matter, which can be shaped into the various planets and planetary systems. When the Sophia impacted this area, this field, she created a really bizarre event, which is the appearance of the archons, which is like suddenly these locusts or these insects emerged. Even before they had a habitat, eventually they build themselves a habitat, and that habitat is the solar system. So when we talk about the archons, we're talking about the origin of our solar system from a Gnostic viewpoint. It's a fantastic story, and you have to read it and just not ask you to believe it, but just read it and consider it. It is a really remarkable story.
And it's on your website, metahistory.org, right?
That's right. And I'm going to post a link also on the homepage. I want to point out something really wonderful that's come up, Mel, since I wrote Not in His Image. You know, I was pretty sure when I restored and recovered the Gnostic creation myth of Sophia that I was doing it accurately and correctly. I was confident. I took great care to do it. And no other scholar has done that. I'm the only Gnostic scholar who has restored this myth, which was the absolute centerpiece of the pagan mystery schools. It was their highest teaching. But I had some reservations because there are some incidents in it that are so bizarre that I thought, boy, it's going to really be hard for people to swallow this, you know. For instance, how is anybody going to believe that in the earliest stages of our solar system, even before the planetary bodies were formed, that this cybernetic archon species could have arisen? You know, how is that possible? You know, it's like really a stretch of the imagination, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you something. About 6 months ago, I came across this information about this remarkable person named Andrew Cross, C-R-O-S-S-E. And Andrew Cross was an Englishman who lived at the same time as Faraday and these other pioneers of science at the end of the 19th century. In fact, that was a very critical moment in the history of science, because Faraday had discovered electricity, and if the nature of electricity had been explored properly, we would have an entirely different physics than we have today. You know, we would have the electric universe model and plasma physics instead of this ridiculous atomic model with relativity theory and quantum theory, which is all completely wrong.
Right.
So At that particular interesting moment, around 1890, this amateur British scientist named Andrew Cross performed an experiment. And this experiment is called the abiogenesis of the Acari, A-C-A-R-I. And if you go into Google and you put in ACARI insects, Acari insects, you will come up with the most mind-boggling piece of information. I tell you, when I saw this, my jaw hit the floor. What this man, Andrew Cross, did was an experiment which was actually repeated by Michael Faraday, And Michael Faraday ain't just nobody, you know what I mean? He's a very, very big figure in the history of modern science. In this experiment, Andrew Cross induced an electromagnetic field in a certain medium. I can't remember exactly what it was. And guess what happened?
What happened?
Insects spontaneously appeared.
Huh. Wait a second. They materialized.
They materialized out of an intense electromagnetic field exposed to a metallic medium. And they are called the Acari insects, A-C-A-R-I. And I'm not making this up. And it was even reported in the British Journal of Science, and a paper of the British, the prestigious British Academy of Science records this experiment.
What is the scientific explanation for these insects to all of a sudden materialize out of nowhere?
Well, there is none, Mel, and I'll tell you why. Because if physical science and cosmology and physics had not taken a wrong turn with Niels Bohr and Einstein and Max Planck, who are the three great founders of modern physical theory,
right.
If it had not taken a wrong turn into the bizarre and ridiculous notions of these men, we would have had an electric universe model. And we would have understood the key thing that nobody today understands, although we better find out soon. That is the relation of planetary and galactic electricity to life. We don't even know what electricity is, for God's sake, And so at that moment, the reason why we cannot explain today the Acari insects, although it is an attested experiment that was repeated by the likes of Michael Faraday, is because we don't know the relation of cosmic plasmic electricity to life. We don't know how electricity can give direct birth to life forms. But that experiment is the key, and it's also the verification that the archons could have actually been produced in the way the Gnostics said.
That way. Something tells me that Tesla may have known this, and of course, Tesla's technology is sequestered.
Totally. Tesla was probably getting back to that. Tesla was somebody who realized that around 1880, 1890, that modern science had lost its way. Perhaps, in some degree, it was misdirected. That's an interesting story. And he tried to bring it back. He tried to bring us back to an understanding of what telluric electricity is. And, of course, he was suppressed, and his patents and his inventions were stolen. And we, to this day, don't even know what Tesla knew.
Right.
But he would have been able to give us a really good interpretation of this phenomenon.
Whenever I look at a street full of cables everywhere, and I think of Mumbai, former Bombay in India, and see all these cables everywhere, I think of Tesla. We would not need cables, but anyway, that's a different story.
That's right.
By the way, we're lucky because we haven't been disconnected. I shouldn't even say it because I may jinx it, but we have some great questions from people around the world that I'd like to ask you if we can. And this is the first one. This comes from, I don't have a name here, but as I reflect more on the powers that be and their control mechanisms, I've been wondering if this agenda couldn't go back thousands of years. Do you think the ancient version of the powers that be could have been behind the killing of Hypatia to put in place the religious myths as a way to control the people? The methodology is the same, establish opposing sides and kill the disagreeers. And of course, they have greatly expanded their repertoire. And if that's the case, they would be especially dangerous this close to the end of their plan.
Yeah, okay.
Long question.
I'll give it to you straight. Sure, that is exactly why they killed Apesha. That is why they would, it's being entirely in their agenda to kill today, just as they did then, or to kill me. But I have an announcement for those people. They may be getting very dangerous at the end of their agenda, but so am I. So am I getting dangerous. And so are those of us who have the real...
You said you were getting dangerous.
Yeah, well, that's where they're going to cut us. I have been cut off on this talk 3 times now at this subject, 3 times.
Yeah, I can tell. You want to... See, I think there's more to it than that internet connection.
Yes, there is, of course. They hire people. I think they're deplorable. Who are the people they hire to monitor all these things? Your program is certainly monitored because you are much too close. You're a heretic, man. You're much too close to the truth that liberates, Heresy is the truth that liberates us, It's the truth of choice.
Proud to be one, and I hope they're learning something from this conversation.
Yeah, right. Get it straight and learn something. Right. So let's try one other question and see if we can just push it a little bit further, push our luck a little further, okay?
Okay, sure. Let's see. This question. Henry David Thoreau said, quote, "The man who goes alone can start today, but he who travels with another must wait till that the other is ready," unquote. Clearly, more people must awake until we can even really begin this journey of taking back the planet. Yet, it's taking them so long. Personally, it is my greatest frustration, waiting for people who are so slow to come to any realization of what's going on. How do you deal with that, the waiting, or do you?
I don't wait. And there is something I would like to convey that comes straight out of my understanding of Gaia, straight out of my communication with Gaia, because I have the privilege as a Gnostic shaman, a Gaian shaman, to access her intelligence, as it were. And Gaia is teaching me certain things. She's teaching me about her ways. She's teaching me her magic. It's a very profound instruction. And I would like to share with you, in response to the concern of this person, which I also feel, I'd like to share to you one of the things she told me. She said to me, and this is almost an exact quote, "I don't play the numbers, I play the odds." This is how I interpret that. Gaia also wants to see the divine experiment put back on course. She wants to see us live together as brothers and sisters, to dance and celebrate and play, to learn how to have free energy, to make a social utopia on Earth, and to deal with conflict and differences in our society, but not to allow the predators to run the game. She deeply, deeply wants that, because our presence here is part of her. We are her experiment. Human species is a very unique component in her experiment. She told me she's not counting, ever would count on the great majority of the human species to wake up, because she doesn't play the numbers, she plays the odds. So this is how I interpreted that. If today, she plays also on what is called a 5-1 parity. 5 is equal to 1 in her calculations. So if there were today, let's say, 10,000 predators, these interspecies predators, the financial banking gangsters, the financial terrorists, the military terrorists, the religious terrorists, they're all terrorists, if they were here with their control game, and there were 10,000 of them, let's say, at the executive level, we know that they have many accessories. We know that they even have good people, unfortunately, who stupidly do their bidding for them. But let's just talk about 10,000 New World Order psychopaths operating at the executive level. What would Gaia require in order to turn that program and defeat their aims? She would need 2,000 people who saw completely through the game. 2,000 against 10. Why? Because she works on a 5-1 parity. So Gaia doesn't require that the whole human race undergo some paradigm shift. She doesn't require a quantum leap that spreads like surf through humanity and all these people wake up. I'm not waiting for nobody to wake up. Nobody. What I'm doing is I'm taking my stand on the front line of these 2,000, of the critical group of warriors and visionaries that she requires. She doesn't require a majority. She doesn't work on democratic principles, you see. So forget it and let go of your despair, and don't wait until people are ready. I have to tell you, I don't know who this person is, but I have a lot of problems in society because I've just about blown away most of the people that I've met socially in the last 3 years since I got the term of Gaia awakening. And I've just...
No, I'm just saying, this is Joe from Nashville.
Okay, Joe from Nashville. I'll tell you, this is funny. I had a big argument with a friend of mine here in Spain when she said, John, what are you doing? I mean, you have to wait till people are ready. And I said, no, I don't. Because I was pushing people's buttons and confronting them with things. And she said, well, John, people can only come to something when they're ready. And she said, you have to respect their limits. I said, I have no respect for anybody's limits. Not now, it's too late, And so don't wait, don't be in despair. Just take your place in the front line.
Be brave. Be
brave.
Be invited out of parties if you have to. Just like I do, right. Just like Jay Whitener does. But here's...
just like Jay is another one.
Exactly.
Jay is another one. He really is. Yeah,
He's a big fan of your work, by the way.
I know he is.
And
what the French call, Mel, it's what the French call insortable. It means we can't take you out anywhere.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to continue reading as many as I can because, when you listen to these questions, and I'm very proud to say that our show is as good as the people who listen to it. And these questions, some of them are lengthy, but you'll realize how enlightened and smart our listeners are. Here's another one. You have said in the past that the progenitors of the current world paradigm have a quote-unquote sickness as to seemingly almost try and excuse them for it, like a proper American democratic liberal. In my life experience, I have learned that intention is the key determining factor in reaching a conclusion regarding the actions of another. In fact, if and when all the dots are connected and all the social evil is uncovered that has been perpetrated onto the good people of the world for the last 2,000 plus years, what should happen to the evildoers? And more importantly, if nothing or not enough is done, how long do you think it will be before they regroup to derail any serious efforts to bring a more enlightened Sophianic society into place for the future?
Mm-hmm. Well, measures are underway to address this problem. And I'm going to give you a brutal and direct response delivered to you with compliments of Kali. Now, Kali, who is my spiritual guardian, is an aspect of the divine feminine. And you can consider Kali to be the rage of Gaia. She represents the rage of Gaia, and she is a warrior goddess. Kali is the most powerful protective force on this planet. And if you're going to go after the predators like I do, you better be in Kali's band. So think about Kali and think about calling her in.
You gave me a clear answer on that one.
Yeah. Can I continue?
Yes.
Yeah. The predators and the sick people and those who want to deceive and dominate, we wouldn't say they would never be there, but they would just be on the margins of society. What a contrast to the current situation, right?
Yes.
They're certainly not on the margins. We good people who just want to get along with each other and thrive and learn and create and play, we're on the margins, and they're at the center of the game, okay? This is what has to be changed now with the warrior powers that come through Kali and with the awakening of Gaia. And as that is changed, I will answer your the listener's question in this way. What do we do with the predators? We eliminate them, period. Elimination. That means liquidation. That means kill. There is no other way to deal with predators. You cannot have a society, any society on this world, in any country, of any nation, of any language, that harbors and tolerates interspecies predators, such as pedophiles, rapists, financial terrorists, military fanatics and terrorists, and people who are their accessories. You can't. It's just, you got to wake up and be realistic, folks. You cannot have a society that harbors these people. They have to be eliminated, and they know it. They know it, and that's why they protect themselves so fanatically. That's why they go around with bodyguards, and you can't get to any of them.
Right.
But there are ways to get to them. There are ways to get to them, and there are ways, shamanic ways, and Gaia and Kali have ways to get to them. And the one thing that I would say, without going into that subject right now, because it's a very touchy subject, and I would be cautious of what I say, but one thing I can assure you, do not deny yourself the murderous rage you feel. A decent, loving person can feel murderous rage and still be a decent and loving person. And you ought to feel murderous rage about what's happening, especially financial terrorism, these wars, these hoaxes that are continually perpetrated on us. Global warming hoax, eco-fascism, swine flu hoax, everything is a goddamn hoax. And if you don't feel murderous rage toward the people who are perpetrating these hoaxes, you're lacking something as a human being. But don't judge yourself because you feel that rage, because Gaia needs it, and we're going to need it.
Like one of our guests, James Gilliland, says, don't be a neutered zombie.
No, and don't be a wimp either.
Yeah.
Most of these people are wimps. One of the, I had a teaching from a high Dakini, Matangi. She's kind of a voodoo witch last month that just blew my socks off. I do this Dakini instruction thing. It's nothing mysterious about it, folks, and it's not channeling. In fact, I can explain it and teach it to an 18-year-old or any intelligent person. So anyway, I got this teaching from Matangi. She says to me, because they talk in very brutal and ruthless terms, these Gaian Dakinis. They're not sweet. They're very loving and tender, but in a way they're also very brutal because they're dealing with brutal truths. She says to me, you know what? Do you want to know what the illusion of power is? It's very simple. Take somebody like Henry Kissinger, or take somebody like the head of Monsanto, or the head of Goldman Sachs, who are what's her name? The woman who created the derivatives. Her name is Blythe Masters, a woman who created the derivative scam. Take some people like this. You think they have power? No, they don't have power. What they have is the illusion of power. But you have to understand what the illusion of power is. The illusion of power is this, that Henry Kissinger, or the head of Monsanto, exercises power that they themselves do not command. This is the exact Dakini syntax. For instance, the President of the United States exercises power, but he himself commands no power. So if you were actually in the presence of that human being, one-on-one, he would have no power, apart from the system through which he exercises power. That's the illusion of power. And by contrast to that, you have the warriors of Gaia, and like myself, and when you see me, I am the source of my power. And you get my power direct. I do not relegate or execute my power through any system whatsoever. That is real power. And so I call upon all of you who are listening, who feel up to this task of protecting Gaia and humanity, to claim your own power. And that is how to overcome these perpetrators, because they, in fact, do not have the power that they wield. It's just an illusion. But your power is real.
That is the epitome of being a sovereign individual, to derive the power from yourself.
Totally, and I so love this word. I so love this term, a sovereign individual.
Yeah.
I like the term autonomous, Mel. Mm-hmm. Only power we have is through the autonomy of our own bodies and minds and hearts. Everything else is an illusion.
Absolutely. And people have submitted multiple questions. I'm going to try to ask you one each, if I can, before we get disconnected again. This one, okay. Are you aware, this is from our forum, from somebody with the name of Ripping the Veil. Are you aware that the ancient Greek word agape, or agape, pronounced agape, most used by early Christians and translated as quote-unquote love, has an entirely different meaning than we associate with love today. It is conditional and relates to discipline and obedience between a master and slave, rather than affection. What do you believe are the implications of modern so-called Christians being almost entirely unaware of this fact, thinking Christ was talking about having gentle affection for everyone when he was not?
Yeah, that's right. You know, the words of Christ, the words attributed to Jesus in the Old Testament, are like cultic formulas for brainwashing people. You know, the sermons in the Beatitudes, sermons on the Mount, you know, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Absolute crap. I mean, Charlie Manson or any cult leader you could name could not come up with more prize material than this, you know. Right. And what is actually being propagated through the message of love, the specious and deceitful message of love, in the New Testament, is a master-slave relationship. And if you want to go back to this master source of this, go back to the Zadokite, go back to the ancient theocracies, and particularly go back to the Sumerian, you know, story of the Anunnaki. That's another scam. That's another hoax.
Oh, you think that's a scam then?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally. You know, we were not created by an extraterrestrial, an advanced extraterrestrial civilization from another planet. We are the products. The human species is a product of divine imagination originating in the galactic core, in the core. And there are no planets and civilizations in the core of the galaxy. There are just the divine forces of the luminosity and the living, loving power of the gods. And we come from there. So this whole Anunnaki story is an aberrant mythology. Even Joseph Campbell pointed that out. Joseph Campbell pointed out that the Levantine model of the master-slave relationship between God and humanity is completely unique. And that is the Anunnaki story. That is the basis of Christianity. That is the basis of the fraudulent concept of Christian love.
Well, I keep thinking of this, of what you said of the Akari insects, and I'm still reeling from that comment you made.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Would it be possible that we, all of a sudden, came out to be the same way?
How's that?
Well,
came out to be
meaning that because of electricity and all that, maybe us and everything we see around us were just a result of the same way the Akari insects materialized.
Right, but we didn't, because when you go into this, it's a brilliant question, and it's a very valid question, Mel, and the way to answer that question is to go and listen to the story, listen to the episodes of the Gnostic myth. But you say, I would say this, we, the human species that emerged on the planet Earth as creatures of the Earth, children of the Earth Mother, are an organic, warm-blooded species. The Archons are a silicon-based, cybernetic, insect-like species. Okay?
Right.
Big difference. They inhabit the solar system at large. They live in the realm of the other planets, exclusive of the Earth. They cannot live on Earth. They don't have a plan to invade Earth. It's completely wrong. They will never invade Earth. They couldn't survive here. They can't survive in an oxygen-rich atmosphere, and also nitrogen is very corrosive to them. And you know, 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen, by the way, of the terrestrial atmosphere. But let me just say this. This is a wonderful thing that I've been learning lately. If you read plasma cosmology, and if you read and research on the internet the new theories of the electric universe, you'll find very, very much that fits beautifully with the Gnostic creation myth. And in that scenario, in that paradigm, Mel, can also say that we are also electrical creatures. We are. I'm talking to you now using the electrical chemical circuits of my brain.
Yes.
And everyone is listening to me because your brain circuits and synapses are firing millions of shots a second to take in my words. Our bodies and cells are producing electricity and photons all the time. So we are also creatures of the electric universe, but there is a huge, huge difference between us and the Archons. That is very simple, is that we are grounded through a certain mysterious force called Kundalini, the serpent power, that our electrical circuits, the body electric, the electricity of your brain, the electricity in your hands and your cells, the electricity throbbing behind your eyes is grounded to this planet, which is alive. And the Archons are not. They live in an extraterrestrial environment dominated by inorganic chemistry. We live in an organic chemical environment, and we as creatures are grounded cells in the body of the planet. That is part of the great wonder of being a human being.
You know, you mentioned oxygen. You know, I just had this thought: oxygen corrodes metals, but we need it to live, and CO2 is poisonous to us, but it's needed for the flora. But that's a different story. Here's another question. This one comes from Helios. Hi, John. Basically, what I've been hearing on your interviews is Gaia, Sophia, is packing her bags and heading home. If you haven't yet, can you speak a little about the mechanics and nature of the signal transmission between Gaia, Sophia, and the Pleroma? Also, have any humanoids from other galaxies ever visited our solar system, like discovering you have a family living in another country that you never knew about? And if not, are all the UFO sightings and UFO writings just archontic?
Okay, I'll answer the second part first because I like to get it out of the way.
Okay.
Nobody knows, and nobody's an expert or an authority. In my view, the greater part of the hardware sightings, okay, flying objects, are man-made, and they reflect the hidden military black ops technology that has been developed through the Nazis. And, you know, some of you may know that story.
Right.
If not, go research it on the internet, you know. So there is a portion of the black ops military in the United States using hidden technology, using free energy systems, unfortunately, for very sinister militaristic purposes. And that would account for a lot of the UFO sightings. As far as the presence of other humanoids, other strains of humanity on Earth, or the presence of other interdimensional beings who are benevolently inclined to us, they're all over the place, and they always have been. I mean, come on. If you get if you believe the record of indigenous peoples like the Hopis, we have star brothers coming and going all the time, you know? But I must add that they cannot solve our problems for us. So it may be comforting to think that we have star brothers, coming in and out of this dimension, or other humanoids moving among us. It doesn't matter, because the problem of solving the deviation of the divine experiment of Sophia is our problem, earthbound humanity's problem. And no matter how enlightened they are and what advice they might have, they can't make a whit of difference. We have to sort it out ourselves. Okay?
And here's one from Truth 2010. Is religion the cause of war and violence on this planet? That is what is happening in the Middle East. Was there a mind virus written into the scriptures to take out the various factions based upon the prophecies written into them? Basically, a destruction program into religion and having people activated by it, and why it is so hard to talk about.
Belief drives behavior. I urge you to reflect on those three words. Belief drives behavior. If you want to look at any situation, look at a family scene. How are the family behaving? How are the children behaving? How are the parents behaving toward the children? Look at a community scene. How are the leaders in the community behaving toward the other people? Look at the governments. Look at the religions. Look at the behavior, and then ask yourself, what is the belief driving this behavior? This is what I call a telestic technique. It's the kind of investigative or forensic logic that initiates used. If you follow that principle, you will find that to almost entirely the pathological, destructive, genocidal, and geocidal behavior on this planet goes back to religion. And it goes back to a very specific set of religious propositions, which are of the Palestinian Redeemer complex. The Messiah, the Father God Creator, the chosen people, the apocalypse and judgment of the world, the divine plan. These are the elements in that ideology, and that is the belief that drives this behavior. You know, I realize that some people would say, well, why is John Lash so against religion? You know, because wait a minute, we also hear that the New World Order people also want to destroy religion. You know, they want to destroy Christianity, you know, and there might be a tendency in a crude sense to group me with them. Nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, the reason why I want to destroy Christianity is completely different than the reason they do. I want to see it go down because it's untrue and it's deviant and dangerous. They want to see it go down because they've used it as a tool long enough. They don't need it anymore. And one of the things these sinister, monstrous people do is they always destroy and eliminate the tools that they have used, whether they be people or whether they be doctrines, once they've served their purposes, you know. So that's in their MO. Could I just say one thing very briefly? 2 minutes now, in reference to the previous question. It had 2 parts.
Yes.
Okay? The first part was about the correction of Sophia. I would like to make, on your program, Veritas, a very Veritas voracious announcement, a voracious Veritas announcement. On March 19th of 2011, the planetary entelechy, the planetary intelligence, the living, divine consciousness of this planet, called Sophia, sent a set of coordinate signals to the galactic center. And she did this through the vibration from the interior of the Earth that was produced when the barycenter of the planet at the supermoon exceeded the speed of sound. At that time, people were noticing strange rumbling sounds coming from the interior of the Earth. You may have picked up on this.
Yes.
Even in caves in Tibet, they were thinking, what the hell are these sounds? People in Florida were standing out in their lawns
Absolutely.
for like 10 minutes saying, it's like rumbling like a freight train.
Yes.
That was the barycenter of the Earth-Moon system. You see, the Earth and the Moon both revolve around a common system of mass, which is displaced by 82 sections toward the center of the Earth. In other words, the distance from the Earth to the Sun, the mass of the Earth is 82 times greater than the mass of the Moon. So this barycenter, which is the common center of mass, is 82 times closer to the Earth than the Moon. Imagine a big seesaw, but very uneven. The pivot of the seesaw, the axis, is not in the center, but way, way down toward one end of the seesaw.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That barycenter is actually about 1,000 miles beneath the surface of the Earth. And every single day, every 24 hours, it makes a complete circuit through the interior mantle of the Earth. And on March 19th, it moved to an excess of 768 miles an hour, which is the speed of sound, resulting in the sending out from the Earth of a set of coordinates to the pleroma center. And this is the first moment. This is what I call Gaia Sophia, the mothership, setting her coordinates to realign to the galactic center. And this is a momentous moment in human history. Momentous. Totally unparalleled. It came 8 days after the Japanese earthquake.
For the layman out there, what is the meaning of this?
Well, the Gnostic myth teaches us, and again, go back to this beautiful story. I tell you, I'm a comparative mythologist. As you know, I've studied just about every myth on the planet, every creation myth, from Australia to Greece, to Rome, to the American Indians, whatever, you name it. This is an incomparable and unique myth. It explains that when the divine Sophia had conceived the human experiment, the divine experiment, which is us, had encoded the human genome in the galactic center, she became so fascinated with what would happen with our experiment that she plunged away from the galactic center and eventually turned into the planet. So, unanticipated to the goddess herself, this happened. This story is so fantastic that it calls upon you to have empathy for a divine being, that she could have done something and something could have happened to her that she didn't anticipate. In the process of turning into the planet Earth, which is described extensively in the Gnostic teachings, and I quote them in my book, she lost her bearings, as it were. She lost her compass. She lost the sense of how she is coordinated with the gods of the galactic center, which is her home base. And she's like a mother ship on a long journey who lost signal contact with the port of departure. On March 19th, she sent the first set of coordinates back to the port. And now the mothership Earth is going to be aligning physically, spiritually, in consciousness with the galactic center and correcting her journey. And that is going to have a ripple effect on human experience that you cannot even begin to imagine.
Is there a culmination of this alignment that's taking place now?
No, there's not a culmination, because one of the wonderful things, Mel, about the Gnostic vision story, I like to call it a vision story, is that it's open-ended. It's a myth that doesn't have an end. It's not like the Bible and Revelation, and it ends with the judgment and the end of the world and the apocalypse. It's not like that. It's not like any other myths, like the Nordic myths of the end of the world or apocalypse myths. It's completely open-ended. What happens to the earth, to humanity, depends on our relation to her. Planetary Tantra is a power-sharing arrangement with the planet. It is to love her, to know her story, to participate in her experiment, and bring this experiment around to its proper course. So there is no outcome. The only outcome is more and more beautiful cooperation, more and more beautiful flowering of human potential, more and more beautiful development of this planet into the kind of environment that she intends it to be. That's all. And more full spectrum connection, not only with the galactic center, but with other worlds all through our galaxy. Full spectrum communication. We don't have it now because we've lost our own way and we don't know ourselves. But when we get our bearings, this full spectrum connection with other civilizations and other galaxies will come as a natural consequence.
And what you said about the rumblings, I'm still reeling from what you said, because I saw that video multiple times, and I received some emails from people who lived in the area and were calling the sheriff's department, and they were saying that, oh, it was just afterburners from a near airport. The nearest airport was about 15, 20 miles away.
Right. You know, Einstein once said the most wonderful thing in human knowledge is the awareness of the mysterious, you know?
Absolutely. And here's another question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Finish your statement. Sorry.
Well, the truly mysterious. I'm not talking about woo-woo, Twilight Zone mysteries. I'm talking about the truly mysterious. And Gaia is truly and deeply mysterious. And when you learn her ways and communicate and interact with her, you understand these mysteries and these fantastic events from a totally different viewpoint.
Okay. And I'm leveraging the fact that we haven't gotten disconnected. Here's another question. This one comes from Truth Only. He asks, are the archons behind the powers that be? And how can we eliminate or neutralize their influence on our world? How did the writers of the Nag Hammadi view them? Love your Last Veritas interview. Greatly looking forward to this upcoming one.
Sure. We need to be really careful about this archon information. On the one hand, it is an extremely precious piece of occult insight, that is to say, insight coming from people who were masters of parapsychology and occultism, who understood the paranormal to a profound degree, and who were able to look into other dimensions. So their knowledge, their information about these archons is very, very crucial to our survival. But having said that, I would add this caveat. I believe that the Gnostic profile of the archons was clear in that we cannot really blame them for what is wrong. Any power that they have over us, we allow them to have. Now, they are insidious. They are mind parasites, you know. And to the extent that we are vulnerable to mind parasites, they do take over our minds and deviate our behavior. And they are the supernatural forces behind the powers that be. They are the supernatural forces that infect the pathology of our species and make it much worse than it would be without them. They exaggerate the effects of our pathology. That is why they're so dangerous. But at the end of the day, we are responsible for our own minds. And we are responsible, as you said, for the sovereign existence of our own minds. And when we claim that back from them, then everything changes very, very quickly.
This one, John, I'm somewhat confused regarding the assertion that the Archons have no intent and yet created much of our solar system and possibly a human clone. Can you please clarify?
Sure. If you go and you read specific details in the cosmological treatises, don't go read the Nag Hammadi library in English as it is currently made available, because it's a bunch of gibberish and very, very badly translated. I suggest that you go to the homepage of metahistory.org. You look in the right-hand column and you'll see Nag Hammadi reading plan. You click on that and it will lead you to a list of my commentaries on 18 of the main texts in the Nag Hammadi library. It's going to make a lot more sense to you than trying to read the gibberish and the garbled mess of the Nag Hammadi library in English. If you do that, you'll find that there are 2 or 3 cosmological treatises, such as On the Origin of the World and The Reality of the Archons, that make one point explicitly clear. This point is the response to the last question. The text says that when the Archons arose, Gaia, Sophia, the divine being who was then witnessing this whole phenomena that she had inadvertently triggered in the impact zone, saw that they were mindless, and she gave them intelligence to allow them to think that it was their own. And that it says very specifically that they were able to create the planetary system as a kind of imitation of the pattern of the pleromic eons. What this means is that they created the solar system as a model, an imitation, a mechanical imitation of what is actually at the galactic center, the realm of the pleromic eons. And what is at the galactic center is a fluid, living, luminous, loving, self-conscious, sensuous, fractal explosion of super life.
That sounded so poetic.
It's like a kaleidoscope of super life that is entirely alive. And the Archons cannot create anything living, but Sophia bestowed upon them the ability to perceive this beautiful phenomenon of super life and to imitate it in an extremely inferior model of planetary orbits and inorganic celestial mechanics. So the answer is very clear to both of these questions. Likewise, they didn't create the human species, but they were able to create a kind of a clone or imitation, like a virtual reality substitute. And they would dearly like us to abandon our sensuous bodies and our warm-blooded mammalian instruments and upload our consciousness into these phantom entities. They would dearly love us to do that. That would be their greatest triumph. But were we to do so, we would abandon the living reality of this planet for a phantom existence in a cybernetic void of no meaning. And that is the danger posed by the Archons. They don't have a plan. They just want to suck our reality out of us so that they can have a vicarious kick of living through us. And this is exactly what we are warned about by the Gnostic seers. Exactly.
And this one, before I read this one, I want to say hello to everybody at the WebBot Forum. You probably know they interviewed you recently, and they're huge fans of your work. This one comes from one of their forum members who happens to listen to us also, Bubbly Bugger. Anyway, John, you discussed on a WebBot interview that during a telistic, Gnostic, or psychonautic experience, that it's not what you experience, while you're in the alternate mode of consciousness, but what you take out of it. Doesn't matter what you examine while you're in a sporting goods store. It's what you take home to use is what matters. Can you explain how the Gnostics and shamans might have practiced this?
Sure. I love that sporting goods thing, You can go into any store. You can go into Macy's. You can go into, the biggest shopping malls in the world and wander around and see all these things. But, what do you come home with, right? Well, telistic shamanism is like that. I coined this term, telistic shamanism. It comes from the word telos, Greek word telos, meaning aim or purpose. And that is the same as the name the Gnostics called themselves, telestes, or we who are aimed. The practice of telepathic shamanism is very simple. You first formulate in your ordinary mind a question. Let's say that you want to understand what is the role of nitrogen in human consciousness. Okay, good question. For instance, we breathe right now. 80% of what you're breathing is nitrogen. There's only 21% oxygen. Well, like, what's the nitrogen doing? Oh, that's not doing anything. Oh, yeah? Well, I have to tell you, that is very far from the truth. So anyway, suppose you want to go and explore what is the purpose of nitrogen and what is the effect of breathing nitrogen. So you form a very, very clear question. It has to be crystal clear and sharp. It's like a scalpel. And then you go into an altered state, usually through taking a psychoactive plant, because that's the most strongest and most reliable way to get there. And then you are brought to the presence of the organic light, which is the living luminosity of Gaia. It is her living divine body. And it is here on earth, it permeates all matter. But normally, in an ordinary state of ego consciousness, we don't see it. The level of your ego mind has to be lowered, and your sense of aliveness and awakeness has to be heightened. Then you see the organic light, and you communicate with it. And then you converse with the organic light, put your question to it, and it will give you answers. It will read out answers. It will download answers to you. It will show you things. It will teach you. Her name is wisdom. The name of the earth is wisdom. She teaches. And this is exactly what the Gnostic seers did. They went as individuals and as groups into altered states, and they asked Sophia these questions. And what they learned in the light, from the light, they then turned around and they brought back to the world. So they were the great teachers and educators of the pagan world. This is a known fact that very few scholars have had the courage to address. They taught all of the arts and crafts, metallurgy, music, mathematics, astronomy, beekeeping, navigation, cosmetics, all of the roots of those ancient systems of knowledge came from the teachings that were propagated by these seers. So that is what they brought back from the mall, and they brought back from sports shop.
Right. And this one, by the way, folks, I'm not going to be able to ask. Some of you submitted multiple questions. I've tried to ask one per person. We only have a couple left. This one comes from No Mind. Do you think there might be even greater levels of creation above and or outside of what we perceive as planetary, galactic, and even cosmic existence? Might that mean that there are unknowable levels of trickster type entities that manipulate those quote unquote below them, as above, so below?
Yeah, sure. But so what? You know, I mean, personally, who cares? Where is that going to get you if you knew all that? I'll tell you, there's just one predatory trickster species that you got to worry about, my friend. And if you don't know who that one is and how that one behaves, it doesn't matter if you know that they're all over the universe, like flies on you know what. And it doesn't matter how many dimensions you can go plunge into. If you don't recognize the one predatory species that is critically involved in the human experiment, you're going to blow it no matter where you go. So one of the values, one of the unique advantages we have from the Gnostic teaching is focus. Focus, man. You know, I'm sure there are other, we know that our galaxy is not the only one. We live in one galaxy. There are billions of galaxies, Okay, you want to know who all the tricksters are in those other galaxies and what are all the interdimensional levels of the labyrinthine types of inorganic and non-inorganic actions and mind and no-mind interplays? Well, fine. But if you don't even know the predator that's staring you in the face, none of that other information is going to get you anywhere. You see?
Right.
So focus.
And this one is a little bit long, but it's too interesting to shorten it. This one comes from Terry. Mr. Lash, first, thank you for having the tenacity to hold on to your experience for a lifetime. The work it took to reveal its wisdom. and the courage and integrity to speak about fundamental flaws of a frame of reference that can only lead to self-annihilation. In a recent interview with the Webbot Forum interview, the topic of sex and its appropriate role in Planetary Tantra was described as the sharing of power between two consenting adults and Gaia Sophia for pleasure. I'll find some courage to ask you this question. Where does that leave someone without a partner? I have chosen celibacy for many years, not from a stance that rejects sexual union or pleasure, more from an unwillingness to share that power in a less than sacred way. Orgasmic pleasure became an act of celebration of living and an appreciation and gratitude for my body, not dependent upon a man at all. Instead, I offer my pleasure as an energetic call for connection to Source, while the prescribed threesome of a couple engaged with Gaia Sophia might be more powerful. Would an individual so engage in such a union prove magical and useful as well? Terry. Wow.
Whoa. Okay.
You have some liquor there to digest this question?
Let me take a swig here. Here we go. Tantra, Planetary Tantra is what I transmit. I teach and I transmit Planetary Tantra. I use the word transmit because if you're hearing these words, you are getting the transmission. It's not just information, not just telling you something I know. I'm sending you something that I have. And I can do that because I have a boost. And the boost is her. The boost is Gaia. The boost of her pleasure, the boost of her bioelectrical magnetic field. So I'm a human being, and grounded in her bioelectrical magnetic field, I can send out a signal that is much stronger than a separate individual could do. Separation is an illusion, by the way. I'm sure you know that. Now, what I've discovered, and this is a key part of Planetary Tantra, is that if two people combine their sexual and erotic and physical and emotional and spiritual energies and triangulate with her, the boost is even 10 times stronger. This is the principle of Planetary Tantra. Now, you ask a question, if you choose to be celibate, I would ask you this, well, that's fine, and you could perhaps, in that choice, have pleasure and a strong erotic bond with Gaia, with the planet, because that's what Planetary Tantra is, an erotic bond with the planet. But wouldn't you want to share it with someone? I mean, to me, it's inconceivable. I mean, I go around, my big dilemma is, who am I going to share the pleasure and beauty that immerses me all the time? Who am I going to share it with? So it's really a question about, do you want to share, how do you want to share, and who do you want to share with? And I can't advise you on celibacy or non-celibacy, but it seems to me that those are questions that would be worth looking at.
And this is the last question. Comes from Jim. Mm-hmm. A very simple question, but a powerful one. Any comments about our sun?
Yeah, boy, we could have a whole talk about the sun.
I bet.
And I wonder if I get the opportunity, which I would love to talk to you again, if we could really talk about what happened on March 19th and the consequences of this, because it's absolutely momentous.
Absolutely.
There is a very weird term in the Gnostic teachings. It's called trimorphic protanoia. Trimorphic protanoia. It's actually the name of one of the Coptic documents which scholars are completely unable to translate or understand, because these Gnostic religious scholars are not mystics, and they do not have shamanic and mystical experience, and these texts are coming directly from such experience, so they can't possibly interpret them correctly. The trimorphic protanoia, as I describe on MedHistory.org, is a Gnostic term for how Gaia originally conceived our experiment. When she was in the Pleromaic core, before she fell out of the core, to use that metaphor, she had a vision of the human species evolving in a 3-planet system. There was an Earth-like planet, which would be our habitat. There was a star, which would be the sun, and there was a moon satellite. And ideally, this is what we would be living in. There would be no solar system. We would be living on the Earth with a moon circulating the Earth, and we would be going around the sun. If things had developed as she originally pictured it. But as the Gnostic vision story says, certain bizarre and unexpected events took place. So we find that we're living on the Earth, captured in the inorganic solar system. However, the integrity of the trimorphic protonoia of the three-body system still remains. From Gaia's point of view, and I assure you this on the highest level of my occult investigation as a shaman, in Gaia's view, the sun and the moon are integral parts of her instrument. They are integral parts of the Gaian superstructure, the Gaian superorganism. The moon is an incredibly important part of her body. And in Planetary Tantra, I talk about how to work with the moon to receive Dakini instruction. That is to say, to tune in to the mind of Gaia and learn from her. The sun, what's going to be happening now between the Earth and the sun is going to be momentous. Because as soon as she sends back this set of navigational signals to the pleroma center, the mothership is going to be wheeling around and making a course correction. And as she does so, her physical and geophysical relation to the sun is going to change. The orbital distance to the sun will change. The electromagnetic exchanges between the sun and Earth will change. The angle of the ecliptic will change. And the first signs of these massive changes we're seeing is in the earthquakes that are happening around the Pacific Rim and elsewhere. So this is momentous. And one of the first things we need to understand as passengers on the mothership is how Gaia is communicating and cooperating with the sun and the sun with the Earth. Not in a way to destroy us, not in a way to burn us up, not in a way to produce coronal mass emissions that fry us into popcorn. No. In life-giving and life-sustaining transmutation of the Earth-Sun connection. We are living into it every single day. And this is a wonder to behold.
And I never thought I would ask you this question, but do you think there's a correlation between chemtrails and the sun? And I ask this because I've spoken to people and I've read a lot about our DNA that operates like with photons, almost like miniature laser beams.
Exactly.
Could it be that the chemtrails are there to block messages, just like Gaia sending messages out? The sun may be sending messages to our DNA. Is it possible that this may be one of the reasons why chemtrails exist?
Yeah, I personally believe that chemtrails are an extremely evil tool of some insane geoengineering plot that has been hatched up in the minds of the New World Order predators, and these psychotic, murderous control freaks who think that they can screw around with the atmosphere. Well, they've got another thing coming. And the one thing that I would say, I'm investigating this as we speak, and I would love to report on what my findings are as I track Gaia's correction, because Gaia's correction was set on March 19th, 2011, a momentous moment in the history of the human species. And as I'm tracking it, I'd like to report on what is happening between the sun and the Earth, but I'll give you my guess so far. You know, the purpose of the sun, the role of the sun, see, the sun is called Sabaoth in Gnostic creation myth, and it is said that the sun made a deal with Gaia, that the sun made a pact with Gaia, which we call the structural coupling of the sun-earth systems. And the role of the sun is to protect and preserve life. So I really feel that although we have been infected with a fear about these mass emissions from the sun, they actually may have beneficial healing and purgative effects far beyond anything that we currently understand. And that they can eventually also, in certain ways, counteract against this ridiculously insane meddling with the atmosphere called geoengineering.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Any more information you would like to share of the March 19th event?
Simply that as Gaia, think of her as a big mothership, an ocean liner that's been off course. she's sailing in very stormy seas. There's danger that the passengers will be harmed or they'll fall off the ship. There's a lot of havoc, a lot of mayhem and confusion. But as she sends out her first set of new coordinates to the galactic center starts to send back coordinates. I'm not quite sure how this is done yet, but I'm investigating it, how this signal exchange will take place. But as the ship veers around, and by the way, she's veering toward port, the way that the ship is navigated, I can explain how the mothership of the planet is navigated. And as she does so, she does what happens to any ship that's in a big storm. I said on the WebBot interview, I was in a freighter in the South China Sea in a typhoon for 3 days with 60-foot swells. 60-foot swells.
Wow.
I would see the bow of this freighter, and it was like a 300-foot freighter, 300, 400 feet long. See the bow of it go completely underwater, and this massive wave would hit the cabin, where the pilot's house, and I would look down. I was at the back of the boat, and I would look down, and the two propellers would be completely out of the water, and then wham, they would go down in the water again, and the bow would go up into one of these swells. And this went on for 3.
Don't leave me with that cliffhanger. 3 days in the typhoon.
We were really hanging on to the end. That was beautiful. We just did very well. Okay, this is what I was saying. When a huge ship wheels around in that kind of weather, the plates that it is composed of crack and warp and groan. It's a fantastic, scary sound that you hear if you're ever in a situation like that. It's unforgettable. And this is what is actually happening right now. The Earth, the planet Earth, which is now going to expand, because we know that it's grown from a smaller size to a larger size. This is the expanding Earth theory, a brilliant new scientific paradigm which complements Gnostic cosmology. As it expands and turns in its course, these tectonic plates are going to warp and snap and groan tremendously. And this is what we're actually seeing day after day right now. And it's a really impossible not to participate in the correction. Impossible to ignore that the great mothership is turning, because everybody in the world is feeling it.
That means that the winds are going to be stronger too. If the Earth expands, becomes bigger, all these disasters, if you want to call them disasters, you may call them corrections, they're going to be magnified.
Well, imagine yourself again in the metaphor on this ship. There may be some havoc on board and cargo shifting around and people thrown around, but the main thing is that the mothership is getting back on course.
So once it gets back on course, what do we expect as human beings?
Well, we expect that there must be, first, a group of people who identify themselves as part of her navigational crew. And second, we must expect that the passengers on the ship recognize also that there are predators in their midst. There are dangerous people on board, and that they need to be eliminated. So these are the two things that need to be made conscious.
And I don't mean to rush it, but I just want to make sure that we don't get distracted again. Please tell us how to get in touch with your work. And by the way, of course, because we have so much more to talk about, we'll have you again in the future. You know you have an open invitation again.
Well, thank you. That's very kind, and I really, really enjoyed the opportunity. Just go to metahistory.org, and you'll see the site. Go to the Gaia Sophia material in the site guide. There's also audio. There are audio files on the site now, so I can walk you through it because it has a lot of material. And if you want to contact me, please do. Just click on Site Author, and there's my email. You know, it's a tremendous responsibility and a privilege to carry this Gnostic teaching. It's unique in the whole world. And I like to take direction. I like to know how people would see me taking it and where people would like me to take it. So, you know, in my sovereign intelligence, I'm completely open to hearing people's responses and suggestions. So please do contact me.
And as John Lash always says, his enlightenment is ours and we love to leverage his presence here. John, once again, what a pleasure and an honor to have you back. I hope all is well with you there in Spain, and I look forward to another discussion in the near future.
Me as well. Well, thank you so very much, and be well till the next time.
You take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was John Lash. This was another great appearance by this true Renaissance man. It seems that we never get to finish, but that's perfectly fine. He has graciously accepted to return in the future. As you noticed, technology was not on our side this time. Nonetheless, John and I did what we could to make sure this interview made the necessary impact. I learned that we must find strength within, not because some outside power grants it. John offered to reschedule so he could find another location with better internet connection. And although he did not have to, he says next time he will, so that the audio quality remains at its best and we don't get disconnected as we did tonight. As usual, send John a message letting him know you enjoyed it. I'm sure he's always delighted to hear from you. And I want to thank you, Veritas member, for your loyalty and support. Without you, this show would not have been possible. And I'll leave you with a quote from Graham Greene. Heresy is another word for freedom of thought. Thanks for listening. I'm Mel Fabregas. Until next week, be well, and remember, be skeptical, but don't close your mind.